Audio-only disclaimer. This video contains audio content only. There are no visual elements or images accompanying the audio. If you're expecting to see video footage, please note that this is an intentional audio-only presentation. We recommend listening to this content rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding and enjoy the audio. Welcome to Hidden Histories. Today we're exploring one of the most fascinating yet little-known cultural transformations in Central Asia. The story of Kafiristan, now known as Nuristan. Nestled in the peaks of the Hindu Kush mountains lies a region that has captured the imagination of explorers, scholars, and storytellers for centuries. From Rudyard Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King to ancient Sanskrit texts, this remote mountain realm has been a source of mystery and intrigue. What makes this story particularly compelling is its dramatic culmination in the winter of 1895–96. When an entire culture was forcibly transformed in just 40 days. But before we dive into that remarkable event, we need to understand the rich tapestry of history, beliefs, and traditions that made this region unique. Today's journey will take us through ancient wine rituals, magnificent wooden temples, encounters with early explorers, and the survival of ancient Indo-European traditions that persisted until the modern era. We'll explore how this isolated mountain region preserved practices that had vanished elsewhere centuries ago, examine the remarkable architectural achievements of its people, and understand how geography shaped one of the most distinctive cultures in Central Asia. We'll also look at how elements of this ancient way of life survive today among the Kalash people of Pakistan, the last practitioners of traditions that once flourished throughout these mountains. 1. Geographic and environmental context. The story of Kafiristan begins with its extraordinary landscape. Picture yourself standing amidst towering peaks that rise above 5,000 meters, where ancient holly oak forests cloak steep mountainsides and rushing rivers carve deep valleys through the Hindu Kush range. This wasn't just any mountain region. It was a natural fortress that sheltered its inhabitants from the empires that rose and fell around them for thousands of years. The region encompassed approximately 13,000 square kilometers of some of the most challenging terrain imaginable. Bounded by the main Hindu Kush range to the north, the Kunar Valley to the south, and the Alishang River to the west, Kafiristan was a maze of interconnected valleys created by four major rivers: the Alangar, Pek, known as Kama, Landai Sin, and Kuna. Each valley became a world unto itself, fostering distinct dialects and customs while maintaining connections through ancient trade routes and shared cultural practices. What made this region truly remarkable was its climate. Despite its high altitude, these valleys enjoyed relatively mild temperatures and adequate rainfall, creating microclimates perfect for agriculture. The locals terraced the mountainsides, growing wheat, barley, corn, and millet. But perhaps most importantly, wild grapevines thrived here, climbing the holly oak trees whose small leaves allowed just enough sunlight to reach the precious fruit. A feature that would play a crucial role in the region's unique cultural practices. The geography of Kafiristan didn't just shape its agriculture, it fundamentally influenced its history. When Buddhism spread through Central Asia, bringing literacy and state administration to many mountain regions, Kafiristan's isolation allowed it to maintain its ancient traditions. When Islam swept through surrounding regions in the 8th century, these same mountains became a barrier that preserved pre-Islamic beliefs for over a millennium. The locals weren't just skilled farmers, they were fierce warriors who used their knowledge of the terrain to maintain their independence against numerous invasion attempts. This geographical isolation created something remarkable: a living museum of ancient Indo-European cultural practices that had disappeared elsewhere centuries ago. The inhabitants developed sophisticated architectural techniques using local cedar wood, created intricate irrigation systems, and maintained ancient religious practices that would fascinate later scholars with their similarities to early Vedic traditions. One of the most interesting aspects of Kafiristan's geography was how it influenced social structure. Each valley became a semi-autonomous unit, with its own dialect and local customs, yet all were connected by a shared cultural heritage. The people developed an ingenious system of paths and bridges to maintain communication between valleys, creating a network that allowed them to unite against external threats while maintaining their distinct local identities. 2. Ancient cultural heritage and religious practices. The religious and cultural practices of Kafiristan offer us a remarkable window into the ancient Indo-European world. What makes this particularly fascinating is that until 1896, this region preserved beliefs and practices that had vanished elsewhere centuries or even millennia ago. The religious life of the Kafirs, as they were known to their Muslim neighbors, was a complex tapestry of polytheistic beliefs, ancestor worship, and elaborate ritual practices that would have been familiar to ancient Greeks, Vedic Indians, and pre-Christian Europeans. At the heart of Kafir religion was a pantheon of deities that shows striking parallels to ancient Indo-European gods. The supreme deity was Imra, also called Mara, who bore remarkable similarities to the Vedic god Yama. Below him was a fascinating figure called Indra, clearly related to the Vedic Indra, who served as the region's wine god, a role that would have been familiar to followers of Dionysus in ancient Greece. The similarities don't end there. They worshipped a goddess called Dasani, whose name echoes the Rigvedic Disha, and maintained sacred fire rituals that parallel ancient Persian practices. What set Kafir religious practice apart was its intensely local character. Each valley had its own sacred spaces, often featuring wooden temples with intricate carvings of deities and ancestors. These weren't quiet, contemplative places like Buddhist monasteries. They were centers of community life where people gathered for festivals, feasts, and elaborate rituals involving music, dance, and wine consumption. The social structure of Kafir society was equally fascinating. They maintained a complex system of social advancement based on feast-giving and warrior achievements. A man could rise in status by hosting elaborate feasts for his community, where he would distribute wine and food while showcasing his wealth through the construction of commemorative chairs and effigies. These effigies, carved from cedar wood, would later become some of the most prized artifacts in museums around the world. One of the most remarkable aspects of Kafir culture was the role of women. Unlike their Muslim neighbors, Kafir women enjoyed considerable freedom. They participated in agricultural work, owned property, and could choose their own marriage partners. They weren't required to wear veils and could participate in religious festivals and community gatherings. This freedom would later become one of the main points of conflict with their Muslim neighbors. The Kafirs practiced a unique form of ancestor worship that combined religious devotion with historical memory. Important ancestors were commemorated with wooden effigies placed in temples and shrines. These weren't just decorative, they were believed to house the spirits of the deceased and were regularly honored with offerings of wine and food. Through these practices, the Kafirs maintained a living connection to their past that went far beyond mere remembrance. Their funeral practices were equally distinctive. When a person died, their body would be placed in a wooden coffin decorated with carvings and left exposed on the mountainside. This practice, reminiscent of ancient Zoroastrian exposure burials, was seen as allowing the deceased spirit to freely join their ancestors. The Kafirs believed that their dead continued to influence the world of the living, and regular offerings were made to maintain good relations with ancestral spirits. Perhaps most intriguing was their concept of purity and pollution, which governed many aspects of daily life. Certain activities and states were considered polluting, requiring ritual purification. This system showed remarkable similarities to ancient Hindu concepts of purity and pollution, though it developed its own unique characteristics over centuries of isolation. 3. Wine culture and ritual practices. Of all the fascinating aspects of Kafir culture, perhaps none was more distinctive than their elaborate wine traditions. Unlike their Muslim neighbors who prohibited alcohol, the Kafirs elevated wine consumption to a sacred duty, integrating it deeply into their religious and social life. This wasn't just casual drinking, it was a sophisticated cultural system that connected them to ancient Indo-European traditions stretching back thousands of years. The story of Kafiristan's wine culture begins with the wild vines that still grow in these mountains today. Known scientifically as Vitis Nuristanica, these vines were unique to the region and perfectly adapted to the local climate. The Kafirs developed an ingenious system of viticulture, allowing the vines to climb holly oak trees whose small leaves provided just the right amount of sunlight for the grapes to ripen. This practice required considerable skill and bravery, as workers had to climb tall trees to harvest the grapes. Historical accounts of this wine culture are fascinating. When Timur Lenk, Tamerlane, passed through the region, He noted the distinctive yellowish wines produced by the locals. The Mughal Emperor Babur, in his memoirs, dedicated an entire chapter to the region's wine traditions, describing how villages near Kafir territory would constantly switch between Islam and the local religion, drawn by the allure of wine-drinking festivals. The production process itself was a carefully guarded tradition. After pressing, the wine was stored and aged in goatskin containers, a practice that probably influenced its final taste. Different strengths of wine were produced for different occasions. Some were diluted with water for everyday consumption, while stronger varieties were reserved for religious ceremonies. The Danish researcher Leonard Edelberg, who studied the region in the mid-20th century, documented a special vineyard called Indrekun, literally, Inder's Corner, where wine was produced specifically for religious purposes. The ritual aspects of wine consumption were complex and fascinating. During certain ceremonies, wine would be sprinkled on statues of deities, particularly those representing Inder, who served as the wine god. The sharing of wine followed strict social hierarchies. The amount and quality of wine one received reflected their status in society. Special silver cups were used by high-status individuals, though by the late 19th century, many had switched to wooden vessels. Perhaps most intriguingly, wine played a crucial role in the Kafirs' warrior culture. Before battle, warriors would participate in wine ceremonies believed to grant them courage and divine protection. Successful raids were celebrated with wine festivals where warriors would recount their exploits and receive public recognition for their bravery. The calendar of Kafir life was marked by wine festivals that combined religious devotion with community celebration. During these events, which could last several days, wine would flow freely while people performed traditional dances and sang ancient songs. These festivals served multiple purposes. They honored the gods, reinforced social bonds, and provided opportunities for young people to meet potential marriage partners. One particularly fascinating aspect was the role of wine in marriage customs. Unlike their Muslim neighbors who prohibited alcohol and practiced arranged marriages, the Kafirs allowed young people to meet and court at wine festivals. These gatherings provided rare opportunities for social mixing between the sexes, with wine helping to ease social interactions. However, strict rules governed these encounters, and any misconduct could result in severe penalties. 4. Architecture, art and material culture. The material culture of Kafiristan represents one of the most remarkable architectural and artistic traditions to emerge from the Hindu Kush region. At its heart was an extraordinary tradition of woodcarving that transformed the region's abundant cedar forests into elaborate temples, homes, and ceremonial objects. This wasn't just decorative art, it was a sophisticated system of visual communication that encoded social status, religious beliefs, and historical memory into physical form. The most striking examples of Kafir architecture were their temples and public buildings. Unlike the stone and brick structures common in surrounding regions, Kafir buildings were primarily wooden constructions, often multi-storied and built in a distinctive step-like arrangement on mountainsides. The engineering was remarkably sophisticated. Buildings were designed to withstand earthquakes through an ingenious system of joinery and flexible construction techniques that allowed structures to move without collapsing. The real marvel was in the details. Every important building was adorned with intricately carved pillars, doors, and beams. The motifs included geometric patterns, animal figures, and stylized representations of ancestors and deities. But these weren't merely decorative, they formed a complex visual language. The number and elaborateness of the carvings on a house indicated the owner's status, while specific patterns marked buildings as sacred or secular spaces. Perhaps the most fascinating artifacts were the horn chairs, ceremonial seats carved from single pieces of cedar wood, often featuring elaborate horn-like projections. These chairs were more than furniture, they were symbols of achievement. A man could only commission such a chair after hosting a specified number of feasts for his community, making them physical manifestations of social status. The most elaborate examples had multiple tiers of horns and intricate relief carvings depicting heroic deeds or religious scenes. The temples themselves were architectural masterpieces. Unlike the austere mosques of their Muslim neighbors, Kafir temples were riot of carved decoration. The interior spaces were divided into hierarchical zones, with the most sacred areas marked by the most elaborate carvings. Wooden effigies of ancestors and deities were placed in specific locations, creating a three-dimensional map of the spiritual world. One of the most remarkable aspects of Kafir material culture was their tradition of creating ancestor effigies. These wooden statues, representing important community members who had achieved high status during their lives, were placed in temples and shrines. They weren't mere memorials, they were believed to house the spirits of the deceased and were regular recipients of offerings. The craftsmanship of these figures was extraordinary, with individualized features and detailed representations of clothing and weapons. The tragic epilogue to this artistic tradition came with the forced conversion of 1895–96. Many temples were burned, and countless wooden artifacts were destroyed. However, some pieces were saved, either hidden by the locals or taken as spoils of war. Of particular interest are the pieces that ended up in the Kabul Museum and the Musée Guimet in Paris. Some of the temple pillars found new life as supports in mosques, their pre-Islamic carvings sometimes visible beneath layers of paint or plaster. The sophistication of Kafir material culture extended to everyday objects as well. They were skilled metalworkers, producing distinctive jewelry and weapons. Their textile traditions included unique weaving patterns and embroidery techniques that survive today among the Kalash. Even their agricultural tools showed remarkable innovation, with irrigation systems and terracing techniques that transformed steep mountain slopes into productive farmland. 5. Colonial encounters and early documentation. The story of how Kafiristan became known to the outside world reads like an adventure novel, filled with intrepid explorers, political intrigue, and remarkable cultural encounters. The first documented European contact came in 1602, when Portuguese Jesuit missionary Bento de Goa visited a city he called Kafiristan during his journey from Lahore to China. However, it was the 19th century that brought the most fascinating accounts of this mysterious region. One of the most colorful figures in this story was American adventurer Colonel Alexander Gardner, who claimed to have visited Kafiristan twice in the 1820s. His first visit ended dramatically when Dost Muhammad, the emir of Kabul, killed members of his delegation, forcing Gardner to flee through western Kafiristan to Yarkand. His second visit in 1828 was briefer but produced valuable observations about northern Kafiristan and the Kuna Valley. While some historians question the accuracy of Gardner's accounts, his descriptions of local customs and geography contain details that would later be confirmed by other observers. The region's isolation and strategic location made it a focus of intense interest during the Great Game, the 19th-century competition between British India and Russian interests in Central Asia. In 1883, British surveyor William Watts McNair undertook a daring mission, disguising himself as a hakim, traditional doctor, to explore the area. His subsequent report to the Royal Geographical Society provided the first systematic documentation of Kafir territory and customs from a Western perspective. However, the most significant European observer was George Scott Robertson, whose 1896 book, The Kafirs of the Hindu Kush, remains the most detailed account of traditional Kafir society. As a medical officer during the Second Anglo-Afghan War and later as British political officer in Chitral, Robertson gained permission to spend nearly a year, 1890–91, in the village of Kamdesh. His timing was crucial. He would be the last outsider to document Kafir culture before its forced conversion to Islam. Robertson's accounts are fascinating in their detail. He described elaborate funeral ceremonies where the deceased's achievements were recounted through day-long chanting sessions, detailed the complex system of feast-giving that determined social status, and documented the intricate religious ceremonies that marked the agricultural calendar. His descriptions of Kafir warfare, including their tactics and weapons, provide crucial insights into how they maintained their independence for so long. The region also captured the literary imagination. Rudyard Kipling's famous 1888 novella, The Man Who Would Be King, was set in Kafiristan, telling the story of two British adventurers who become kings of this remote region. While fictional, Kipling's description of the landscape and people drew heavily from actual accounts of the area, creating an enduring image in Western literature that mixed romance with reality. One of the most interesting aspects of these colonial encounters was how they revealed the complex political relationships between Kafiristan and its neighbors. The Kafirs weren't simply isolated primitives, They were skilled diplomats who played various powers against each other to maintain their independence. Some groups, like the Kham, paid tribute to Chitral while maintaining their autonomy. Others developed sophisticated systems of trade and alliance with neighboring valleys while fiercely defending their independence. The documentation of this period also reveals fascinating details about how the Kafirs viewed outsiders. They had a complex system of dealing with visitors, involving ritual purification procedures and specific protocols for interaction. Some villages had designated houses for receiving foreign guests, while others maintained strict rules about where outsiders could go and what they could observe. 6. The historical transformation. From Kafiristan to Nuristan. The winter of 1895–96 marked one of the most dramatic cultural transformations in Central Asian history. In just 40 days, the region known for over a millennium as Kafiristan, Land of the Infidels, was forcibly converted to Islam and renamed Nuristan, Land of Light. This wasn't simply a religious conversion, it was a complete upheaval of a unique cultural system that had preserved ancient Indo-European traditions for centuries. The architect of this transformation was Abdur Rahman Khan, known as the Iron Emir of Afghanistan. Having already subdued the Hazara people in 1892–93, he saw Kafiristan as the last obstacle to creating a unified, Islamic Afghanistan. The campaign was meticulously planned. Forces invaded from multiple directions, through the Panjshir Valley to Kulam in the west, through Badakhshan from the north, and via Asmar from the east. A smaller force also advanced through Lagman in the southwest. The military operation was brutal but efficient. Armed with modern British-supplied weapons, Rahman's forces overwhelmed the Kafirs' traditional defenses. The timing was strategic. Winter conditions made it difficult for the inhabitants to retreat to their traditional mountain strongholds. Villages were given a choice: convert to Islam or face dire consequences. Many Kafirs fought fiercely, but their traditional weapons and tactics were no match for modern firearms. The transformation was comprehensive. Temples were burned or converted into mosques, with some temple pillars ironically being repurposed as mosque supports. The elaborate wooden effigies of ancestors and deities were systematically destroyed. Some were saved, either hidden by locals or taken as war trophies to Kabul. Of more than 30 wooden figures brought to Kabul, 14 ended up in the Kabul Museum, while 4 were sent to Paris, split between the Musée Guimet and the Musée de l'Homme. The social impact was equally profound. The traditional feast-giving system that determined social status was abolished. The practice of leaving the dead in wooden coffins on mountainsides was replaced with Islamic burial customs. Women, who had previously enjoyed considerable freedom, were required to adopt Islamic dress and customs. Even the traditional wine culture, so central to Kafir social and religious life, was officially banned. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of this transformation was the forced migration. Many Kafirs were relocated to Lagman province, while their lands were settled by veterans of Rahman's army and other Afghan Muslims. A few hundred Qadi Kafirs, known as the Red Kafirs, of the Bashgal Valley, managed to flee across the border into Chitral. However, uprooted from their homeland, they too converted to Islam by the 1930s. The reaction of the British to this transformation was notably muted. Despite having detailed intelligence about the region through Robertson's work, they chose not to intervene. The 1893 Durand Line Agreement had placed most of Kafiristan on the Afghan side of the border, and British strategic interests favored a strong, unified Afghanistan as a buffer against Russian expansion. The speed and completeness of this transformation make it unique in Central Asian history. Unlike many other conquered regions where old beliefs often persisted secretly alongside Islam, the isolation and small population of Kafiristan meant that the change was nearly total. Only among the Kalash people of Chitral's valleys, protected by their location within British territory, did the old tradition survive. 7. Modern legacy and cultural survival. The legacy of Kafiristan lives on in fascinating and sometimes unexpected ways. While the forced conversion of 1895–96 marked the end of an ancient way of life in the Hindu Kush, elements of this remarkable culture have survived through various channels, offering us glimpses into this lost world and raising intriguing questions about cultural preservation in the modern era. The most direct cultural survival can be found among the Kalash people of Pakistan's Chitral district. Living in three valleys, Barir, Bumbaray, and Rumbar, the Kalash represent the last practitioners of traditions that once flourished throughout Kafiristan. With a population of only about 4,000 people, they maintain distinctive religious practices, traditional dress, and cultural customs that echo their Kafir ancestors. Their survival is largely due to their location east of the Durand Line, which placed them under British protection during the crucial period of forced conversion. Today's Kalash face their own challenges. Tourism brings both economic opportunities and cultural pressures. Their distinctive traditions, including public festivals and wine ceremonies, attract visitors from around the world. While this attention has helped preserve some practices by making them economically valuable, it also risks turning living traditions into tourist attractions. The Kalash have shown remarkable adaptability, maintaining their cultural identity while selectively engaging with modernity. In Nuristan itself, traces of the pre-Islamic past persist in unexpected ways. While officially Muslim, many Nuristani communities maintain distinct cultural practices that set them apart from their neighbors. The legendary woodcarving skills of their ancestors continue in modified forms, now applied to mosque decoration and secular buildings. Some traditional architectural techniques persist, adapted to modern needs while maintaining distinctive local styles. The region's linguistic heritage offers another fascinating window into the past. The Nuristani languages form a distinct branch of the Indo-Iranian family, preserving ancient features lost in other languages of the region. Linguists studying these languages have uncovered remarkable connections to ancient Indo-European languages, providing crucial insights into linguistic and cultural history. Museums worldwide now house the material remains of Kafir culture. The wooden effigies and ceremonial objects that survived the conversion period have become invaluable artifacts for understanding this lost civilization. The Kabul Museum's collection, though damaged during the Taliban period, has been partially restored. The pieces in Paris's Musée Guimet provide some of the best preserved examples of Kafir artistry. Perhaps most surprisingly, Kafiristan has achieved an afterlife in popular culture and literature. Rudyard Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King has inspired numerous adaptations, including a famous 1975 film starring Sean Connery. The region's dramatic history continues to capture imaginations, appearing in various forms in books, documentaries, and academic studies. Modern Nuristan faces its own challenges. The region has been a site of conflict in recent decades, including during the Soviet occupation and more recent conflicts. Yet the people maintain a fierce independence reminiscent of their ancestors. The traditional skills of navigation and survival in this challenging terrain proved valuable during these conflicts, just as they had in maintaining independence centuries ago. The story of Kafiristan raises profound questions about cultural survival and transformation in an increasingly interconnected world. How do isolated cultures adapt to modernity while maintaining their identity? What constitutes authentic cultural preservation? The experiences of the Kalash and modern Nuristanis offer different answers to these questions, demonstrating both the resilience and fragility of traditional cultures in the modern world. The story of Kafiristan and its transformation into Nuristan offers us profound insights into how cultures evolve, adapt, and sometimes vanish. It reminds us that what we often think of as timeless traditions can change dramatically within a single generation, while other cultural elements show remarkable resilience, surviving in unexpected ways. This journey through the Hindu Kush mountains reveals more than just the history of one region. It illuminates broader patterns in human cultural development. We see how geography can both isolate and protect unique cultural practices, how religious and social systems adapt to changing circumstances, and how ancient traditions can find new expressions in the modern world. The survival of Kalash culture and the evolution of modern Nuristan demonstrate different paths forward for traditional societies in our rapidly changing world. While some aspects of the old Kafir culture were lost forever in those 40 days of winter 1895–96, others have found new life through adaptation and preservation. The lessons are particularly relevant today, as we witness unprecedented rates of cultural change worldwide. The story of Kafiristan compels us to consider what is lost and what survives when traditional cultures encounter modernizing forces, and how we might better preserve humanity's diverse cultural heritage while respecting the rights of communities to determine their own paths forward. I hope this exploration has sparked your curiosity about the world's lesser-known cultural traditions and the complex processes that shape their survival or transformation. If you've enjoyed this journey through the Hindu Kush, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating cultural histories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of Kafir culture surprised you the most? What other hidden histories would you like us to explore? Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most remarkable cultural transformations. Until next time, keep exploring the hidden corners of human experience.